Okay, so yeah, it was a couple of weeks ago now that we were actually in Hebrews. Gary was talking about the end of chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7, where we saw that this priesthood of the order of Melchizedek was instituted with these great oaths, that God cannot lie. He made an oath by himself. He swore by himself that Christ would be a priest after the order of Melchizedek. And then he went on to explain how impressive Melchizedek is, because Abraham himself, right, the great patriarch, the recipient of the promises, he himself pays homage, right, to Melchizedek. So Melchizedek is greater than Abraham. And then we ended at the last session with verse 10 there. It's kind of a little hint of what's going to come this week. In verse 10, not only was Melchizedek greater than Abraham, but Melchizedek's greater than Aaron, or the Aaronic priesthood, Levi, the Levites, because he was still in the loins of his ancestor Abraham when he met Melchizedek. And that's what this week is really going to be about. The Melchizedek priesthood is greater than the Levitical priesthood, greater than the Levites, greater than the Aaronic priesthood. And why? Because the Melchizedek priesthood is administering a greater covenant, right? The new covenant. The Levites and the Aaronic priesthood administered the old covenant under types and shadows, we'll find out in the next few chapters, right? But now that Christ has come, he's administering the covenant under the fullness of his personal presence with us. No more types and shadows, the fullness of his revelation, which is what the whole book begins with. So let's have a little read. We'll start at verse 11, and we'll just go for a few verses to begin with. Now, if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than the one named after the order of Aaron? For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. For the one of whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe, from which no one has ever served at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, and in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests. So we'll stop there. So the first point that our author is making is a really simple one, right? If the Levitical priesthood could have been perfect, if it could have done what it was supposed to have done, make the people holy, then why would David have ever mentioned this priest in the order of Melchizedek, right? The very fact that David says one day there will be a great high priest in the order of Melchizedek implies that there's something wrong with, or there's something that is not quite fulfilled with the Levitical priesthood, right? Because the Levitical priesthood was the priests that were set up under the Sinaitic covenant. There was lots of, you can go back and read all of the rules for the ordaining of those priests and what they have to do. They were there to administer the covenant to the people, but they themselves could not make the people holy, and that's going to be the theme of the next few chapters, right? So there had to be one who could, and that one was going to be under the order of Melchizedek, the one that is greater than Levi, greater than Aaron. Because verse 12, when there's a change in the priesthood, there's necessarily a change in the law as well, right? These people in the first century that received this letter, it was perfectly logical. You can kind of get into their mindset fairly easily, right? They've grown up with the Levitical priesthood. They'd grown up with all the sacrifices, that all they'd heard from the day that they were born. It had been going on at this point for 1,000 years, or more than 1,000 years. It was probably quite difficult for them to have that paradigm shift whereby they would say, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. But when a new priesthood comes along, that old priesthood is not necessary anymore. We have a new relationship to the law, right? I wonder if you've ever wondered, what is this? Why is there all these rules in the Old Testament regarding the priesthood? What is our relationship to the Old Testament law? Well, a lot of the New Testament will flesh that out for you. It's a very big question, but our relationship to the law has changed because of Christ, right? He's come as a new priest, the perfect priest, who can and does make us holy and enters us into the most holy place, the presence of God the Father, as we are united to him. Therefore, the Levitical priesthood is no longer necessary, right? And he's kind of unfolding these truths to them, right? This is his first introduction to this idea, and he's going to take a few more chapters to explain the fullness of what he's saying there. But our relationship to the old covenant, the old law, has changed. It's no longer binding on us, at least the laws regarding the Levitical priesthood, right? And he goes on to say in verse 13 and 14, look, we know that this new Melchizedek is not a Levite. We know that because he's descended from Judah, right? And no one from Judah in the old covenant law was ever supposed to administer sacrifices. No one from Judah ever was a priest, right? In the traditional sense. Obviously David was kind of like a king priest, but we'll leave that aside. in as much as they were ordained part of the Levitical priesthood, no one that didn't happen to anyone who was from the tribe of Judah. But we know that Jesus is from Judah, right? It's a very important part of Christ's work on earth, and his lineage is that he was descended from David, right, the tribe of Judah, and is the Lion of Judah, we see in Revelation, right? It's a big part of who Christ was, fulfilling all sorts of prophecies and all sorts of blessings that happen in the Old Testament to Judah, specifically about Judah, that are fulfilled in Christ. So it's very important that he's from that line. But it's also important that that's not Levi. Right? He's not descended from Levi. Ultimately, he's descended from Judah. So when his priesthood comes along, Christ's priesthood is instituted and he becomes our high priest, we know it's not a Levitical priesthood. So there's no need to look back to it. It's an inferior priesthood at this point. There's no need for the people in the first century to look to Levi and that priesthood to save them. And there's no need for us to look anywhere other than the Melchizedek, that we have Christ who's descended from Judah. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 15. This becomes even more evident when another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, who has become a priest not on the basis of a legal requirement concerning bodily descent, but by the power of an indestructible life. For it is witnessed of him, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. For on the one hand, a former commandment is set aside because of its weakness and its uselessness. For the law made nothing perfect. But on the one hand, a better hope is introduced through which we draw near to God. Let's stop there for a second. Okay, so he's continuing his argument, doubling down on it, reinforcing it as if we needed some more reinforcing of this point. Right, it becomes even more evident when another priest arises in Melchizedek. You should have already known from the fact that David prophesied that there would be a Melchizedek, that the Levitical priesthood is not all there's going to be. But it then becomes blindingly obvious when that Melchizedek actually arrives, which is Christ, right? And some commentators point out there in verse 15, when it says another priest arises in the likeness of Melchizedek, it doesn't just mean kind of just appears, but arises is the same word that is used often of resurrection, or referring to resurrection. So there's a little hint there that when another priest is resurrected, you could read it. If you wanted to kind of draw out the theological point that is just kind of being hinted at here in the likeness of Melchizedek, it becomes really obvious, right? When somebody is resurrected and then acts as our great high priest, then well, there you go. Then you know the Levitical priesthood is done. It's finished. It's run its course, and it's finished what it came to do. Because, verse 16, he who has become a priest, that is Christ, it wasn't on the basis of legal requirement or bodily descent, but the power of an indestructible life. You see, Christ's priesthood is better than the Levitical priesthood, and this is the first reason why that the author is going to bring out. The old priesthood was just completely arbitrary. Right, in a sense, like Levi was just chosen, not because Levi was particularly special, but he's just one of the 12. He was chosen, and then whoever his sons are, born, they are part of the priestly tribe, but then even, it's more specific than that. It's only Aaron's sons that get to serve as the high priest. So only Levi can attend the temple, only Aaron's sons can be the high priests. It's arbitrary. It's just whoever's born in that line, and it's based on a law, on a written law. No one really earns the right to be that, other than just being born, right? Christ, when he comes, he doesn't get it just because of an arbitrary declaration, okay, yeah, Jesus will be the priest of Melchizedek, but rather he gets it by the power of his indestructible life. What does that mean? Well, that's talking about his resurrection life, right? Back to the thing I was saying about when he arises as the priest in the order of Melchizedek. He has risen from the dead, and he has an indestructible life. He will not die again, right? He's proved himself to be worthy to enter into the Holy of Holies. He's proved himself to be the perfect man, the perfect human, who is able to represent his people before the Father. So therefore he goes into the presence of the Father, sits down at his right hand, and then stays there forever. Indestructible. He cannot be removed. Whereas I'm pretty sure that the Levitical priesthood was pretty destructible, right? Because it's literally been destroyed now, isn't it? AD 70. There is no Levitical priesthood. It's been destroyed. It's destructible. Every single priest, Aaron's sons that ever administered at the tabernacle and then the temple have died. Right? That is a historical fact. Christ reigns forever with an indestructible life. Therefore, he can be the Melchizedek, or the priest after the order of Melchizedek that we need him to be. For it's witnessed of him, you are a priest forever. There you go. This is the Psalm 110 again, and another quote from Psalm 110. He's drawing out the kind of implications of every single word in this little section of Psalm 110. You are a priest forever. Forever means forever. It really means that. Eternal. He's the eternal priest after the order of Melchizedek. For on one hand, a former commandment is set aside because of its weakness and its uselessness. The Sinai code regarding the Levitical priesthood has been set aside. It was only a schoolmaster to lead us to Christ, right? It showed us what we needed. We needed a priest who was going to offer sacrifices, but those priests themselves could never actually do it. Right? The blood of bulls and goats was not going to cleanse our sin. A sinful person who had to atone for their own sin was never going to be able to fully represent people. It was an image, a type, a picture of what was actually going to happen when Christ came. Again, that point's going to be made more clearly over the next few chapters. The law made nothing perfect, but we have a better hope, which is introduced to us through Christ, through which we draw near to God. And this is kind of a very important verse, right? This is the kind of the payoff of all this stuff. You talk about Levitical priesthood, Melchizedek priesthood, all these words. What does it all mean? Well, the payoff is, what it means is that we can actually draw near to God. With one, you don't have the hope of drawing near to God. With one, you do have the hope of drawing near to God. So if you want to draw near to God, if you want to be in his presence, if you want to be made holy by him, if you want to receive all the blessings of being in relationship with the triune God, then it's only going to be through the Melchizedek priesthood, which is Christ. Christ, the great high priest. It's through him a better hope is introduced through which we draw near to God. Okay, let's finish off our chapter. Verse 20. And it was not without an oath, for those who formerly became priests were made such without an oath. But this one was made a priest with an oath by the one who said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. This makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant. The former priests were made many in number because they were prevented by death from continuing in office. But he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. Consequently, he is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. For it was indeed fitting that we should have such a high priest, holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. He has no need, like those high priests, to offer sacrifices daily, first for his own sins and then for those of the people, since he did this once for all when he offered up himself. For the law appoints men in their weakness as high priests, but the word of the oath, which came later than the law, appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. There we go. So the first thing he wants to mention in verse 20 there is that this priesthood has been instituted with an oath. Second reason it's better than the Levite priesthood, right? Levites came just from physical descent. They also didn't have an oath. God did not promise anything regarding them in that sense. But this comes with an oath where God swears that Christ will be a priest forever. And God will not change his mind, right? So it's superior in that sense. This is unchanging. It won't ever go away. You can rely on it from now until eternity. That Christ will be this high priest. And that makes Jesus the guarantor of a better covenant, right? This is where the new covenant comes in, and we'll get into this in the next few weeks. Christ has been instituted with a new oath, a better promise, right? Jesus is the guarantor of that covenant. Because look, verse 23, this is where it gets really important for us. The former priests, they were many in number. There was lots of these priests. There was a whole load of them, right? They needed to be that many because they were prevented by death from continuing in office, right? There only needs to be one great high priest for us, right? We don't need any other priests to mediate for us or to do anything on our behalf, because there's just the one, because his life continues forever as he sits at the right hand of the Father. Whereas in the Levitical priesthood, there was dozens of them all the time, because they would die off and one had to replace the next and replace the next and replace the next. But verse 24, he holds his priesthood permanently because he continues forever. And then consequently, here's the good news. This is like the absolute gospel verse. If we had memory verses, which maybe we might institute in our discipleship hour, we should have this as our memory verse. He is able to save to the uttermost those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. That's the good news to us, right? The fact that he has this indestructible life, the fact that he is able to go before the Father, means that he can absolutely save us. That word there, to the uttermost, that's great. It's a great way of putting it. He save us to the uttermost, right? It's a complete, full salvation. We can have complete confidence in it, right? No doubt that he can save us. No doubt that we are saved as we are in him. He has complete power to do it, complete authority to do it. There is nothing lacking in his priesthood. There is nothing lacking in how he represents us and intercedes for us before the Father. So it gives us complete confidence, right? This is what Hebrews wants to be the great takeaway. The great takeaway from Hebrews is that we should be bold in approaching the Father, and we should have complete confidence that we have a right to be there, and that God looks on us with the love that he has for his own Son. So he's able to save us to the uttermost because he is this priest in the order of Melchizedek. Because look, it was fitting, wasn't it? Verse 26, it was fitting. Again, that word we've seen in the past. It's fitting that we should have such a high priest who was holy, innocent, unstained, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens, right? That is Christ. What a wonderful description of Christ. And it would be kind of worth, if we had the time, just going through each one of those and thinking about how each one of those things is completely embodied in the ministry of Christ and his death and resurrection for us. But he absolutely was, wasn't he? He was holy, set apart, anointed by God, innocent, sinless, wasn't he? Did nothing wrong his entire life, unstained, separated from sinners, not as much as he stayed away from them, but rather he was never corrupted by them, never tainted by being around them, right? And therefore he was able to be exalted above the heavens, right? Christ is able to be our great high priest because of this. It was fitting in as much as he needed to be this, right? In order to have such a high priest, they had to be holy, blameless, sinless. And who else is there like that? Nobody, right? There is nobody that you can turn to for your salvation other than he who fits this description, and that only is Christ. And so the important bit of that is that in verse 27, because he was all those things, he didn't need to offer sacrifice for himself. Christ didn't die on the cross for his own sins, right? We all know that, but it's absolutely central to our faith. All of the priests who ever offered up sacrifices in the temple or the tabernacle, they did. They had to cleanse themselves first. They had to be purified. They had sins they had to deal with. But Christ didn't. He was able to lay down his life as a pure, spotless, unblemished sacrifice, not for himself, but that it would be completely accepted on our behalf, right? Because look, verse 28. At the end of verse 27, he did it once and for all. Only needed to do one. The Levitical priests have to do time and time again because they're always sinning, the people are always sinning. The sin just goes on, so they're continually, thousands and thousands and thousands of bulls and goats and sheep and pigeons and all these sorts of things slaughtered over the centuries that the temple stood. Christ comes and does it one time. One perfect sacrifice is all it takes, right? And so we don't need to repeat that sacrifice either, just not really to go down the kind of Reformation rabbit hole, but like when we celebrate the sacrament, when we do, we're not repeating any sacrifice, right? We are recalling to mind the one-time ultimate sacrifice that took place, and this is one of the great verses for that. There's one sacrifice for all time, when Christ offered himself up on the cross. Because, as we've been saying, he just kind of rounds off his argument here. Look, the law appoints men in their weakness. The Levitical priesthood, they were appointed because, like we said before, it's types and shadows, right? They're weak, they don't actually perfectly do the job, but they point to the one who will. But the word of the oath, this oath that's sworn in Psalm 110, comes after the law, but is greater than the law because it appoints a son who has been made perfect forever. And again, we have to remind ourselves, because this language can sound a little bit alien to us. Well, how was God or Jesus made perfect if he was God? The point is that he progresses, right, in his favor with God. We see that in the Gospel of Luke. As he is a human being, he grew in his knowledge and his wisdom and his stature with men and favor with God, leading that perfect, sinless life. So he qualified himself to be our great high priest. That's what it means. He's made perfect. He became our high priest through his perfect, sinless life. And therefore we can trust in him and we can have that assurance and that confidence. Don't look back to the Levitical priesthood. Don't look to anything else. Just keep your eyes focused on Christ. That would be what the author of Hebrews would say to us. So any questions or comments from the second half of chapter 7? There's a lot.